The Bed Bath & Beyond chairman says he won't reopen stores in California. Joining us now to discuss the matter is Will Hild, Executive Director of Consumers Research, and we have George Carrillo, CEO of the Hispanic Construction Council. First of all, good afternoon to you both. Good to have you on the show today. Will, let me start with you. Now, the chairman is saying that the environment is overregulated, expensive, and risky. How are you looking at this? How do you interpret Bed Bath & Beyond's decision to avoid California?
Yeah, this is something that we've seen across the country where brick and mortar retailers suffer from being having some of the worst effects of the regulatory environment in these states, even more so than drop shippers like Amazon or Walmart that are able to just, deliver goods right to your door. These retailers have to pay all kinds of specific taxes. They have to deal with building codes. They have to deal with employment codes that a lot of these other companies don't have to deal with. And they're already at the disadvantage that brick and mortar is disfavored historically over the last 10, 15 years versus getting things delivered. So anything a state does to make that burden higher is going to make it harder for these businesses to operate. So it's not a surprise that a company like Bed Bath & Beyond that's trying to revive itself after bankruptcy or near bankruptcy would limit the places it's going to reopen stores to places where it's most profitable. And that it just isn't California, given the environment.
So, George, what's your take on the CEO saying that California is overregulated?
Well, it's no secret. I mean, they really do have some high costs for small business owners. When we just look at like the cost of electricity, it's more than twice than a competitor like in the state of Florida. When we look at workman's comp, it's also twice the amount of some of the other states that are lean a little bit more red and a little bit more friendlier to businesses. So these are legitimate complaints, I think, that's coming from the CEO. The other side of this, though, is that California is a large economy. We're talking about fourth largest in the world, or $4 trillion economic driver. There's 40 million people that live there. I think that for a company like Bed Bath & Beyond to be able to enter that market and be profitable, there needs to be some sort of negotiation around the complexities with their laws and their regulations to be able to make it more profitable for a company like this. But also, too, the owner of not the owner, sorry, the CEO of Bed Bath & Beyond also needs to acknowledge they went into bankruptcy not because of California, but because of bad balance sheets and because of not really getting on board with an online platform. So there's a lot that Bed Bath & Beyond really needs to focus on. And I think right now the fight shouldn't necessarily be with California, but more with their balance sheets and how they're going to actually bring this brick and mortar back to life.
So, Will, what do you think about that? What's a bigger influence on Bed Bath & Beyond's decision? It's a company strategy, perhaps, or the regulatory environment?
Yeah, well, I think as he just noted, California is a very large and generally profitable market if you can make it work. So it doesn't stand to reason that Bed Bath and Beyond would forego that market unless they were being honest about the reasons. There's no reason to just say we're not going to do business in California unless it really is so onerous in terms of the regulatory environment, the tax environment, that they just don't feel that they can make money. There's one other thing I'd like to add that I don't think the CEO brought up, but is affecting a lot of brick and mortar stores, and that is crime. You have a situation that some have referred to as anarcho tyranny, meaning for criminals, there's very little prosecution or the threat of prosecution. And so crime like shoplifting, which is a particularly large cost for brick and mortar retailers, thrives. While the tyranny comes from the fact that they have to adhere to all of the regulatory and tax environment that they can't get away with breaking the law the way the shoplifters can. And so a lot of brick and mortar retailers in California, particularly in places like San Francisco and LA, have really struggled with that combination of anarchy from a criminal perspective, but tyranny from a government regulation and tax perspective.
Okay, George, you said earlier that California remains profitable, and that is true. What do you make of Bureau of Labor Statistics data that shows companies have been leaving the state more than entering since 2015?
Well, that's true. I mean, there are companies that are leaving. I think that there's people are looking for tax savings. There, there's really tight profit margins, and the country has changed ever since COVID. COVID really brought on, e-commerce, and for those companies that didn't really double down on it, like how Amazon, that's been their economic driver, is the convenience of being able to shop from your home. And brick and mortar has really struggled with that, and so that we see shopping malls across the country closing their doors because They're just not driving consumers to those brick and mortar stores because of the convenience of online. But I also want to comment a little bit about what my colleague said here about theft. That is a big part. When we look at relaxed states with their criminal justice enforcement on theft, then it is going to really hurt businesses because they do rely on small razor thin margins. And so if there's not a level of accountability and that they can recover those losses, then yes, they're going to be hurting. And so it makes sense why this combination of regulatory and also with enforcement within these retail stores, there are people that are exiting states that are a little bit more relaxed with their criminal justice system. But I will say that California has made some reform. They are trying to provide a level of accountability with people that are shoplifting, but the damage is done. And right now, it's going to take some time to be able to reverse that. But again, it's that economic driver. We're going to have to see how Bed Bath & Beyond is going to come back into this market with brick and mortar. Is that really the right decision for them to do, or do they really need to double down more on their e-commerce and really show more profitability through the accessibility of what America has pointed to, which is shopping from home?
So, Will, do you think the business environment, the regulatory environment, has improved under the Trump administration?
Yeah, I think overall at a national level, it absolutely has. We've obviously seen them repeal a lot of restrictions versus via executive orders that the Biden administration put out, in all kinds of areas, from energy to taxation to regulatory just compliance. Just the paperwork that the Biden administration had piled on to companies in terms of compliance has certainly improved. But that's not going to help much in terms of California relative to other states. That's going to be something that's improved, generally speaking. And California, if they were bottom of the pile before, they're still going to be bottom of the pile, even if it's a little bit better marginally under President Trump.
So, George, can you respond to that? How would you describe the current broader business environment?
So with the big beautiful bill, it does provide a lot of tax savings for small businesses. But what I'm more worried about right now is tariffs. Tariffs are going to, we're starting to feel the impact in the economy. We know that these tariffs are going to be paid by the consumer. Right now, corporate America has been trying to take in a brunt of that, but they have already said they cannot withstand these long tariffs, and so they're going to be passing them on to consumers. So when you do that, now you're really limiting your profitability, especially for a brick and mortar store. It's time will tell if we start seeing more companies go out of business because of his tariff policies. So I don't agree that the president is taking us in the right direction, especially when it comes to tariffs. I just see this as being something very terrible for the US economy.
Okay, well, you can respond to that if you would like to, but I also would like to ask you that, where is the balance here? We obviously cannot have zero regulation, and we can't go to the extreme of having too much regulation. So where's the middle ground?
Well, a couple of things. One, I would share the concern that consumers are going to pay higher prices in the form of tariffs. There's always three parties that can pay in that situation: the importer, the exporter from the foreign country, the importer here, or the consumer themselves. So far, that hasn't been showing up in the inflation data that we've seen. But I agree, it's a going concern and something that we keep an eye on. In terms of sort of how to hit that perfect mean of the right amount of regulation, I mean, look to the states that have a very positive, thriving business environment. States like Florida, for example, have a light touch. They don't have no regulation. I grew up there. I can tell you there is regulation, but it's not the kind of overbearing, constantly micromanaging regulation that California is known for. And sometimes California's regulation is just nonsensical. It's not just that they are overbearing, it's that they get involved in ways that don't seem to make any sense, even to the people operating the stores or the operations there. So it's not only just a question of more or less regulation. Sometimes it's a question of, is it done well? And there are a lot of states that have done it well, states like Texas, states like Florida, that have a thriving business environment. And I think you look to those as the model and not California. Because as you noted, businesses are leaving California. That tells you all you need to know. People don't like losing money. They don't like having to pick up and move somewhere else. It's very expensive. So if they're leaving, that says a lot.
Okay, George, I'll just get one more comment from you. You have experience in the construction industry. Talk to us about where the balance is in having regulation that protects and benefits consumers and workers, but at the same time doesn't undermine businesses and growth.
So regulation exists in order to be able to protect the public. What typically is the problem is the implementation within government of going through that process. Just like their permitting department, sometimes when you have too many regulations and you put too much red tape, the government can't sustain. They don't have enough staff. They don't have enough resources to be able to get that process in place. That's the reason why you see, like in construction, you see massive delays because of permitting. It's not necessarily about the regulation, it's about the amount of time that government has to be able to come out and actually examine that construction site so they can give you a check mark and be able to move on to the next thing. Which those delays can sometimes take months to even years. And now you're outside of your scope of work, you're outside of your balance and your budget. And it really, again, was it the policy or was it the implementation of the policy? And that's where we go wrong here. So California is just like any other state. They have a lot of regulations. Can they manage all of those regulations? Do they really need to look internally to see how do we speed up the process? How do we make this easier on business owners? And I think absolutely. And so I think the middle ground is to see what regulations are needed and can we comply with those regulations from a government standpoint? And are we not getting in the way of growth of our local economy? And that's just a question that I think every state has to be able to answer itself. And right now, California really needs to look at those internal processes and really reach out to the CEO and say of Bed Bath and Beyond and say, let's have a conversation. You open the door. Let's collaborate together. This shouldn't be about politics. This should be about helping build Bed Bath and Beyond back into the U.S. economy and giving us that accessibility as consumers to buy their products.
Well, okay, productive conversation today. Thank you both for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having us.